This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. President Xi says that China holds no grudges or conflicts with New Zealand, calling for greater respect and common ground. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Luxon emphasized the importance of a rules-based system. Now, Taiwan spots dozens of Chinese military aircraft around the island just days after a British warship sailed through the sensitive waterway, a move Beijing slammed as a deliberate provocation. Our top diplomats from Europe and Iran head to Geneva for high-stakes talks, their first face-to-face since the Israel-Iran strikes, as President Trump says he will decide within 2 weeks whether to deepen U.S. involvement in the conflict. Meantime, wild weather grips the region. Torrential rains affecting South Korea and parts of China, forcing mass evacuations, while Japan sizzles under a brutal heatwave. And the EU is banning Chinese firms from medical device contracts over 5 million euros, its first step to enforce fair market access with China. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, Taiwan is bracing for a so-called recall election that could see dozens of opposition lawmakers lose their seats in parliament. We'll tell you how it works and why it matters. China says that it has no grudges or conflicts of interest with New Zealand and wants more respect and common ground between the two countries. President Xi Jinping said this to visiting Prime Minister Christopher Luxon at a meeting in Beijing this morning. Mr. Xi also said that the two sides must look at disagreements accurately to be able to tackle them. The New Zealand leader is on his first trip to China since becoming Prime Minister. Mr. Luxon stressed the importance of a rules-based system during the meeting with Mr. Xi, which lasted more than an hour. New Zealand announced it was suspending funding to the Cook Islands yesterday over the Pacific Islands' ties with China. Wellington says the paused deal is worth some $11 million. And for more on the significance of this visit, CNA's Olivia Seong, she joins us live from Beijing. Ollie, so we do know that China is New Zealand's biggest trading partner, but all in, how would you read into the leaders' discussions?
Well, to tell you what we have seen is China and New Zealand choosing to highlight different parts of that meeting from the statements that we are seeing from the Chinese side, choosing to focus a lot more on the practical trade and cooperation on the economic front. While on the New Zealand side, yes, there was also talk about trade, but they also highlighted security in the Pacific. The Chinese side not making mention of any specific issues, except President Xi saying that there are no historical grudges or conflicts of interest between the two countries, calling on both sides to respect each other and seek common ground. President Xi, in fact, saying that China and New Zealand should, in fact, focus more on cooperation. He talked about, cooperation, particularly in trade and investment, but also to explore potential cooperation in science and tech innovation, climate change and infrastructure, as well as exchanges in education, culture and youth. And this really sort of points to the kind of delicate relationship between China and New Zealand. This meeting just after New Zealand announced that cut in millions of dollars of funding to the Cook Islands after it was unhappy over its deepening ties with China. And from New Zealand's side, Prime Minister Luxon saying that he raised the importance of the international rules-based system and the key role that China can play in helping to resolve global challenges. Now, New Zealand under Prime Minister Luxon has pivoted more towards the US and other Five Eyes partners amid this ongoing rivalry between China and the US. But despite that, we didn't really see that at least play out in the public statements that are coming out. And both sides still very much have reasons to want to work together. Prime Minister Luxon had spent time in Shanghai before traveling to Beijing, and that culminated in the announcements of over $800 million worth of commercial deals. We also talked about how New Zealand depends on China for trade accounts accounting for more than 20% of its exports. And we do also know that China has been keen to shore up its support and its friendly ties with other trading partners amid that ongoing trade tensions with the U.S. Otelli.
Hey, many thanks for that report. CNA's Olivia Seong reporting to us from Beijing. Looking beyond East Asia, talks between Europe and Iran set to take place in Geneva in the first sign of attempts towards a diplomatic solution to the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran. Now, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi will meet with his French, German, British and EU counterparts today, where talks are likely to center on Iran's nuclear program. These discussions will mark the first face-to-face meeting between Tehran and Western governments since Israel first launched strikes on Iran's nuclear and military sites last Friday. Those strikes led to a week of deadly attacks between the arch foes. The talks in Geneva come as U.S. President Donald Trump said that he would decide within the next 2 weeks whether to involve Washington in Israel's bombing campaign. Well, that brief window raises hopes of a possible restart to U.S.-Iran talks following an abrupt halt due to Israel's strikes. The UN Security Council also due to convene today for a second session on the conflict. Well, this request was reportedly made by Iran with support from China, Russia and Pakistan. Well, for more on these talks set to take place in Geneva, Will Denslow joins us live now from Brussels. Will, just walk us through what the European foreign ministers are setting out to achieve during talks with their Iranian counterparts.
Well, on Monday, they had a conversation over the phone, this E3, so Germany, France, the UK, as well as the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, with their Iranian counterpart. Off the heels of that call, these European foreign ministers and Kaja Kallas called for all sides to show restraint, saying that diplomacy essentially is the only path forward, calling for a de-escalation. Now, these in-person talks are certainly significant. There are hopes to carry on that message as far as these European foreign ministers are concerned. The significance of the location also worthy of note, being held in Geneva. Now, this is a place where the initial framework was agreed to what then became 2 years later the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran nuclear deal, as it was coined. So there are certainly hopes that this location will bring good memories for all sides, that there can be some kind of willingness to work together over the issue of Iran's nuclear program. The timing, as you mentioned, absolutely critical, considering we've heard from US President Donald Trump giving that 2-week window where he says he'll consider whether the US will intervene militarily. David Lammy, the UK's foreign minister, after a meeting with his US counterpart, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, says that a window exists for diplomacy now. He says the goal is to prevent regional escalation.
So the timing, the venue, they're all significant. Nevertheless, there would be some sticking points, right, during these talks. And what would those be?
Huge sticking points, and one major one is direct conversations between the United States and Iran. The US has reportedly shown a willingness to have these conversations. Iran, for its part, says it also wants diplomacy. However, we are hearing from Tehran that they're not willing to negotiate at this stage with Washington during what they described as Israeli continued aggression. Iran, for its part, is calling for the E3, so calling for these European nations to do more when it comes to pressuring Israel to cease their bombardments on Iran. Of course, there are huge sticking points that do remain when it comes to the nature of Iran's nuclear program. We've heard in this readout from the E3 plus Kaja Kallas saying that they believe that Iran's nuclear program exceeds what they describe as credible civilian purpose. That's something that Tehran has vehemently denied in the past. So these huge sticking points about the nature of the nuclear program will indeed persist. But of course, there are real hopes that at least some kind of common ground to at least reach the negotiating table can be reached before Donald Trump's self-imposed 2-week deadline is set to expire.
Many thanks for that, Will Denslow, reporting to us live from Brussels. Now, the Israeli military says that it carried out a wave of strikes in the capital Tehran overnight, targeting dozens of Iranian military facilities and a nuclear research site. The IDF says it hit missile production sites and the Organization of Defensive Innovation and Research, allegedly used for developing Iran's nuclear weapons project. Israel also attacked a key nuclear site in the city of Arak yesterday, which houses a heavy water reactor. The IDF said it was targeting the reactor's core seal to prevent it from being used for nuclear weapons development. Tehran showing no signs of backing down as sirens sounded across southern Israel. Cars were set to blaze with smoke billowing from buildings. No casualties were reported. The incident comes a day after Iran struck a hospital in the city of Beersheba, injuring more than 200 people and causing substantial damage. Israel accused Iran of deliberately targeting civilians through the use of cluster munitions, which disperse small bombs over a wide area. Meanwhile, Australia suspended operations at its embassy in Iran and has directed all its officials to leave the country. Other nations that have suspended Tehran embassy operations include Bulgaria, Czech Republic, New Zealand, Portugal, and Switzerland.
More generally, we have a very volatile security situation in Iran. And I'm sure people don't know that we don't have to cast our minds back too far in history to understand the risks to foreign officials in Iran in times of unrest.
A rush by countries to move their citizens from harm continues amid the conflict. Japan said today that 21 of its nationals who left Israel Thursday have arrived at Jordan's capital, Amman, the same evening. Separately, 66 other nationals who had left Iran arrived in Azerbaijan's capital, Baku, Friday morning. A second round of evacuations from Iran by bus could happen as soon as Saturday. Meantime, South Korea says that 4 more citizens have made it to Turkmenistan from Iran, with Seoul providing transport and consular assistance. 30 South Koreans, along with their Iranian family members, made the same 1,200-kilometer journey on Thursday. Now, China, meantime, has on Thursday evacuated 119 citizens from Israel to Egypt through the Taba border crossing. 2 of the evacuees, according to the Chinese embassy in Egypt, are Hong Kong residents. And of course, you can log on to cna.asia for the very latest on the Israel-Iran conflict. And for articles such as this one, well, we don't have that article, but do go online where this article focuses on Israel accusing Iran of launching a cluster bomb missile at civilian population centers. All right, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, South Korea's equity benchmark surpasses the 3,000 level mark for the second time in its lifetime, lifted by expectations of business-friendly policies from President Lee Jae-myung. Although the country's record 2024 current account surplus with the U.S. may prove to be a hindrance in trade negotiations with Washington. Details next. Hello, it's time now for your business update with Olivia Mazuki. And Olivia, a major development in Europe's trade policy. They're saying that Chinese suppliers are now banned from actually bidding on EU public tenders of medical goods.
Yes, I'll tell you, it is official. So this is a major development out of Europe's policy. It is now official that the European Union effectively blocked Chinese companies from participating on public tenders for medical devices worth over 5 million euros. The restrictions are the first to be implemented under the EU's international procurement instrument designed to ensure reciprocal market access. The bloc is citing unfair practices where European firms face discriminatory barriers under Beijing's policies made in China 2025. The EU's medical technology market was worth around $170 billion US. That's back in 2023, with contracts above 5 million euros making the bulk of it. The move has drawn strong protests from China, which describes the restrictions as protectionist. And Beijing adds that it is, quote, a typical case of double standards. This is raising the risk of trade standoff ahead of the upcoming EU-China summit. Now, the restrictions come as China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao and EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic held a video call yesterday. China's Commerce Ministry says that both sides have agreed to promote, quote, healthy and stable development of trade relations. Now, trade tensions have been brewing between Beijing and Brussels after both sides took tit-for-tat measures. Brussels is looking to resolve China's tariffs on brandy and export curbs on rare earths ahead of the EU-China summit next month. Now, South Korea has reported that its current account with the U.S. reached an all-time high last year. The data is threatening to add friction in trade negotiations with Washington. It is already among the top 10 on U.S. President Donald Trump's list of economies with significant trade deficits with America. South Korea's current account with the U.S. came to nearly $120 billion in 2024, marking an on-year rise of about 30%. The figure has been increasing every year since 2019, a reflection of the deepening trade ties between Seoul and Washington. But now it could present itself as a hindrance as President Lee Jae-myung is seeking to get a trade deal with Mr. Trump. The pair was scheduled to meet on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Canada, but it was called off after Mr. Trump left the event early due to the situation in the Middle East. The stakes are high now for South Korea. Its shipments to the U.S. are under threat of being hit with a 25% so-called reciprocal levy. South Korea's economy, as we know, is heavily reliant on trade, with exports accounting for more than 40% of its GDP last year. Analysts estimate that Trump's tariffs could shrink total shipments by 2% and shave off by as much as 0.7 percentage points of South Korea's GDP. SoftBank founder Masayoshi Son is reportedly spearheading a $1 trillion tech hub initiative in Arizona. He's proposing this mega-scale industrial complex focusing on robotics and AI, similar to China's Shenzhen. Project Crystalline aims to bring high-tech manufacturing back to the U.S., create jobs, and cut America's reliance on overseas factories. Mr. Son is said to be in talks with potential venture partners, including Taiwan's chip giant TSMC and also South Korea's Samsung. According to Bloomberg Report, he is also working with U.S. authorities on tax breaks. The project's feasibility is hinging on federal and state support, particularly from the Trump administration. Well, details are still pretty limited at this stage, but if it goes through, it could be the biggest investment of its kind, twice the size of SoftBank's existing Stargate project, which also backed by Oracle and OpenAI. This ambitious undertaking may also help the U.S. regain its position as a global leader in next-generation tech, moving beyond chips and data centers into full-scale manufacturing and robotics infrastructure. And South Korea's equity benchmark has ended above the psychological 3,000 level for the first time in more than 3 years. The Kospi last reached this milestone in early January 2021, when global stock markets were being lifted by a liquidity boost during the pandemic. Analysts have attributed this upward trend for the period to the expectation that President Lee Jae-myung's government policies will help boost the economy. And that includes the recently proposed $14.7 billion extra budget in order to boost domestic demand. And Mr. Lee's election promise is to bring the Kospi to a 5,000-point era and end the so-called Korea discount, which is a persistent undervaluation of the country's assets due to geopolitical and corporate governance issues. Now, global index provider MSCI has lauded the efforts the South Korean authorities took to improve financial market access to foreigners, but it noted that it still remains limited. In its annual market accessibility review, MSCI reported that the progress is needed in areas such as capital and information flow, as well as market structure. This is MSCI's first review on South Korea since the country lifted its short-selling ban in March. Seoul has been working to get upgraded to developed market status in order to boost investment into the country. MSCI will be releasing its first annual market classification next week, and observers say the possibility for South Korea to get a reclassification is pretty low. Japan's core consumer prices have jumped 3.7% in May from a year earlier, and this is the fastest pace in more than 2 years. This comes amid soaring food costs, especially rice. The price of rice, the nation's staple, has more than doubled from a year ago. To address supply shortages, the government has tapped into its emergency rice stockpile, a move usually reserved for disasters. Surging cost of living is putting pressure on Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba ahead of a crucial upper house election expected next month. His approval ratings have plunged, partially due to frustration over rising food prices. In response, he has pledged cash handouts of 20,000 yen, that's roughly around $139 per person, and double that for children. The inflation spike has put more pressure on the central bank to raise interest rates, although it's treading carefully as it awaits clarity on U.S. tariff measures and their economic impact. Greater China markets moving in tight range today as traders evaluate the impact of escalating Israel-Iran tensions. Shanghai, Shenzhen in mainland indices ended the day in negative territory. Hang Seng their leading gains, powering on more than 1.2% at the closing bell. Now, China kept its benchmark lending rates unchanged at its monthly fixing. The 1-year and 5-year loan prime rates left steady after those were lowered last month. Nomura's chief Asia economist explains why Beijing may be holding back its stimulus measures despite economic uncertainty.
The economy seems to be perking up a bit. We saw retail sales grow from May over 6%, now a lot stronger than expected. Exports have picked up, are doing pretty well as well. But, you know, the view we have is that a lot of the strength we're seeing in China right now is borrowed from the future because exports have been front-loaded. And we know with this exchange program for consumption for durable goods, that the subsidy trade-in program, that consumers who are buying fridges now won't be buying another fridge in the second half of the year. So there's going to be payback from this consumer trade-in program as well. So, you know, growth right now, probably first half of this year is probably around 5%. Second half of the year, we have 4%. And so we think Beijing may be saving some policy ammunition right now and ready to use it later in the year when growth slows again, and potentially US-China relations around trade and economics have improved a bit after the London talks. But we still think there is this strategic decoupling between the US and China.
Shares of Chinese toy maker Pop Mart tumbled as much as 6.6% in Hong Kong after Chinese state media called out the, quote, willful consumerism of blind boxes. The world's largest toy maker ended the day's trading more than 4% down, with rival Blox Group tanking by more than 9%. And that is following calls in a commentary published in the People's Daily Media for tighter regulations against blind boxes, adding that they induce minors to become addicted to purchasing them. China currently bans the sale of blind boxes to children under 8 years old. Although the commentary did not explicitly name Pop Mart, it has dampened investor sentiments of one of Hong Kong's exchange's top performers this year, following the global frenzy of its Labubu dolls. Earlier this month, a human-sized Labubu doll fetched more than $150,000 at an auction in Beijing. Despite Pop Mart's drop this week, shares are up by more than 160% this year, and the company still has a market cap of $40 billion, outclassing the combined value of international rivals Sanrio, Hasbro, and Mattel. I don't know about you, I'll tell you I'm not into Labubu, but yeah, There you go.
Neither am I. I'm not spending a single cent on any Labubu. Anyway, thanks so very much, Olivia, for your business report. We are going for a break now, but we will be back on East Asia tonight, where we'll be talking about Taiwan's largest ever recall election. How does that work, and how would that shake up domestic politics? Well, we'll be speaking with our correspondent in just a short while. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China says no grudges with New Zealand. The Chinese leader Xi Jinping calling for more common ground with Wellington in a meeting with Prime Minister Christopher Luxon in Beijing. Taiwan has spotted 50 Chinese military aircraft around the island just days after a British warship sailed through the Taiwan Strait. China has called this a provocation. And diplomats from Europe and Iran head to Geneva for talks, their first face-to-face since the Israel-Iran conflict flared up. The United States' involvement up in the air. Taiwan is bracing for its largest ever recall election, now set for 26th of July. Petitions against 24 out of 31 Kuomintang lawmakers have been approved, and the remaining 7 still awaiting sufficient signatures to be submitted in the coming days. Well, this is a result of a campaign that aims to reshape the island's political landscape. Here is an explainer about how the mass recall process actually works and its significance.
In Taiwan, sitting legislators can be recalled at any point through their 4-year term. The process has 3 stages. First, a petition must gather signatures from at least 1% of registered voters in the relevant district. If this initial threshold is met, a second round of signature collection is required, raising the bar to 10%. If the 10% threshold is also met, the recall goes to a public vote. To successfully unseat the legislator, at least 25% of all eligible voters from the district must vote yes. That's exactly how Kaohsiung Mayor Han Kuo-yu was removed from office in 2020 after being accused of neglecting city affairs to run for president. In the current mass recall campaign, activists and civic groups supporting the ruling Democratic Progressive Party are accusing the opposition KMT of blocking key legislations and cutting the budget. So far, petitions against 31 KMT lawmakers have met the signature requirements and are heading for the final vote. They include a petition against Fu Kunqi, a high-profile legislator from the eastern rural region of Hualien with a past corruption conviction and known for his pro-China stance and tight local networks. If any lawmaker is removed, a by-election must be held within 3 months. And the ousted politician cannot run again in the same district for 4 years. President William Lai and his party are pinning their hopes on the mass recall campaign to regain control of parliament. But to do that, at least 6 lawmakers need to be removed, and the DPP must win back all 6 seats in the by-elections. Still, analysts warn that even if the DPP takes back control of parliament, the deepening partisan divide and political gridlock are likely to continue.
For more, we are joined now by Victoria Jen in Taipei. Victoria, how will this massive recall actually shake up politics in Taiwan?
Well, this recall vote is actually shaking things up in Taiwan. At the heart of it, it's all about the ruling DPP trying to regain control of the parliament. Now, if you remember, last year, President William Lai won his presidency with 40% of the vote. But his party, the DPP, has lost its majority for the first time in years in parliament. And that has, since then, the opposition coalition, which has the control of parliament, has been boycotting its the key legislators as well as cutting the budget, making things very difficult for the Lai administration to push through his agendas and his policies.
As a result, the DPP supporters have launched this massive recall campaign, hoping to get rid of these opposition lawmakers in order to allow the DPP to have a chance to win back these seats in order to regain control of parliament. Of course, the opposition are saying that this is a political purge and an attempt by the DPP trying to silence those who disagree with the government. But there is another opinion poll that shows that nearly 60% of the Taiwanese think that this vote has actually gone too far. But despite that, this vote is going to go ahead as scheduled. And whether or not the DPP can regain control of parliament remains to be seen. But one thing is certain is that this has already divided the Taiwan society, and that this is going to create more uncertainty and chaos for Taiwan going forward.
Okay, so a divided Taiwan society, but what about cross-strait relations, though? I mean, what do you think is a likely outcome of that impacting the relations?
Well, this vote has come at a very sensitive time, especially with the escalating tensions across the Taiwan Strait. Now, if the DPP regains control of parliament, it's going to reshape Taiwan's policies towards China going forward. Now, we all know that the DPP has always been tougher on Beijing compared to the opposition KMT, which prefers open dialogues with China. And President William Lai himself has also labeled China as a foreign hostile force, a threat to Taiwan. And he wants to increase military budget and also deepen ties with other democracies in order to protect Taiwan's sovereignty. But without a majority in parliament, his plans have been stuck. He wants a bigger military budget for his government, but and also other policies have all been blocked by the opposition. So the DPP is hoping that through the recall, they would be able to regain control of the parliament and push through his agendas. And if that happens, this is definitely going to give a big boost to the DPP government and give William Lai a greater mandate to govern and also to push through his pro-independence agenda. But at the same time, analysts are warning that this could trigger a more aggressive response from Beijing because China considers William Lai a separatist and a troublemaker for his hardline pro-independence position. And so under the circumstances, cross-strait relations are likely to deteriorate further.
Okay, well, we hear you. Thanks so very much for that. CNA's Victoria Jen, live from Taipei. In the meantime, Taiwan has detected some 50 Chinese military aircraft operating around the island. And an additional 24 Chinese aircraft, including fighter jets and drones, were also spotted since this morning. 15 of them crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait. That's an unofficial border between the two sides, which Beijing does not recognize. Half a dozen Chinese naval vessels were also spotted during the same period. Now, this follows the passage of a British Royal Navy patrol vessel that sailed through the Taiwan Strait on Wednesday as part of a routine navigation. Beijing condemned the move as provocative, while Taiwan welcomed it. China sees Taiwan as part of its territory and has increased the deployment of fighter jets and naval vessels around the self-ruled island in recent years. Separately, the Chinese Coast Guard confirms it has expelled a Philippine vessel around Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. A Chinese official says necessary measures, such as firing water cannon, were taken after the Philippine ship insisted on intruding into the area. The Chinese Coast Guard says their actions were standardized and legitimate, calling Manila's actions a serious infringement on Chinese sovereignty. Well, this incident in the disputed waters is not the first encounter between both forces this week. Just yesterday, Beijing said it responded to what it called illegal activities from several Philippine vessels between 15th and 18th of June. Manila has yet to issue a statement. The most recent confrontations comes as the U.S., Japan and the Philippines are holding joint maritime drills. Tokyo says the exercises are meant to contribute to the realization of a free and open Asia-Pacific region. Beijing, meantime, also says that it is conducting maritime drills in the waters between central Vietnam and the Paracel Islands. The exercises have reportedly begun in the last hour and will last till Saturday. East Asian monsoon is gathering pace and threatening extreme rainfall in central and southern China. Local media reports are saying that floodwaters rose more than 5 meters above warning levels in the city of Zhaoqing in Guangdong province this week, breaking historical records. Tens of thousands of people had to be evacuated. Officials also issued red alerts late yesterday for several other provinces, including Hunan and Guangxi. China's rainy season came earlier than usual this year, and it's usually followed by intense heat, killing crops and damaging infrastructure. Now, economic losses from natural disasters crossed the $10 billion mark last July. Elsewhere, heavy rain also expected in most of South Korea today, including the capital. The weather agency says the greater Seoul area could see more than 150 millimeters of rain. Over in Japan, officials have issued heat stroke alerts in multiple parts of the country, the hot weather making headlines in the country. At least 4 people have died of suspected heat stroke so far, and more than 200 others in Tokyo were taken to hospital this week. Japan saw its hottest summer on record last year. Coming up in East Asia tonight, the Czech president says China is on par with Russia in terms of state-sponsored hacking and spying. And Thailand's prime minister arrives at the border with Cambodia in the middle of a political crisis triggered by a leaked phone call. Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra has arrived at the border province of Ubon Ratchathani, where a recent clash between Thai and Cambodian troops took place. Now, she was greeted by a Thai army commander whom she had earlier called an opponent during a leaked phone call with Cambodia's former leader Hun Sen. Well, that conversation has triggered a political crisis that threatens to topple her government. Ms. Paetongtarn has since apologized to the Thai people, saying her comments in the call were part of a negotiation tactic. Now, the embattled leader held a meeting with the Ministry of Interior and national security agencies today in a bid to try and resolve the territorial dispute and take a firmer stance on the issue. She'll also be meeting with the governors of 7 provinces near the border a little later and provide supplies to the soldiers stationed in the area. Ms. Paetongtarn has assured that she will continue working with the army, following accusations that her leaked conversation with Cambodia's Hun Sen compromised Thailand's sovereignty.
นะคะแล้วก็ขอยืนยันอีกครั้งว่าทางรัฐบาลกับกองทัพเองเป็นหนึ่งเดียวกันก็อยากให้พี่น้องประชาชนเป็นหนึ่งเดียวกับเราด้วยนะคะเพื่อที่จะสามัคคีเอาไว้ในชาติปกป้องอธิปไตยของเราไว้
That phone call resulted in Ms. Paetongtarn's major coalition partner in government, the Bumjai Thai Party, pulling out of the government. But her government has won some reprieve. The Democratic Party and the Chat Thai Patana have decided to remain in the coalition. And Dr. Purawich Watanasuk from the Faculty of Political Science at Thammasat University weighs in on whether Ms. Paetongtarn's apology is enough to ease the pressure from those seeking her resignation.
For the short term, she believes that her statement can ease the tension and the crisis. But the problem is that this is the long-term crisis. It is the problem of the trust in her leadership, and the most damaging impact from my point of view from that leaked phone call is that it has damaged the trust in her leadership, and I'm not so sure, she still holds the public trust to continue her leadership. The very key problem whether Paetongtarn's government still has full support from the army. The army chief, the army commanders appear to show the unity for her. But behind the scene, I am not so sure, because after the leak call, it has damaged the trust among the army commanders and even the operation army officer on the ground. It did not just damage the trust among among the Thai people, but also in the region too. And I think diplomacy in our region will be more difficult from now.
Now, our next story contains details of sexual assault that viewers may find distressing. A Chinese student who was convicted of drugging and raping 10 women in London and in China has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 24 years. Chen Haozhou was convicted in March of 28 offences, including 11 counts of rape against 10 women. But investigators say they had identified 50 further potential victims. Laura Westbrook was at the Inner London Crown Court as he was sentenced.
In court, 28-year-old Zhou Zhenhao did not react when his sentence of life imprisonment was read out by the judge, who said he would be a danger for life. Judge Rosina Cottage said that he was a sexual predator and later said he was a highly manipulative, intelligent man and that the women were simply elaborate pieces in a game for one. The court also heard victim impact statements, including from 2 women who gave evidence at trial. One woman said what happened shattered her completely. Another woman described her terror, saying she would never forgive him. A third woman said, as she wrote her impact statement, waves of nausea and disgust kept overwhelming her. The court also heard 24 more women have now come forward. This followed an appeal by police who feared Zhou Zhenhao's offending against women in London and in China may have been more widespread after finding video evidence that showed there were more victims. Syra Pike of the Crown Prosecution Service says the investigation is not over.
Following the police appeal, we will continue to review and consider any further charges to ensure that he is held accountable and seek justice for all victims.
Zhou is from Dongguan in the southern Chinese province of Guangdong. He is believed to have lived in the UK since 2017. He was a PhD student when he was arrested after a woman reported she had been raped at his flat after he plied her with alcohol and drugs. During the 4-week trial, prosecutors presented evidence that Zhou was a serial rapist who met women using online platforms and dating apps and invited them to his home under the guise of studying or to have drinks. Prosecutors said he relied on drugs such as ecstasy and an industrial chemical the human body turns into the date rape drug GHB to incapacitate his victims before carrying out his attacks, which he would secretly film using his phone and hidden cameras. Officers found nearly 1,300 videos. Zhou claimed that the sex was consensual and part of a role play, but the videos showed women either unconscious or begging him to stop. British police say he's one of the most prolific sexual predators they've ever seen. Laura Westbrook for CNA, London.
British police have launched an appeal to find more victims. They say they are keen to hear from women from the Chinese student community who may have met Zhou and were living in and around London between 2019 and 2024. For more coverage on the story, do head over to our website, cna.asia. Now, earlier in a story on Taiwan politics, a caption said 36 Kuomintang lawmakers now face recall votes after public petitions. Now, it should be 31 lawmakers, with 24 that have been approved. We do apologize for that error. Now, the president of the Czech Republic says China capabilities is on par with Russia when it comes to state-sponsored hacking and spying. Mr. Petr Pavel told the Financial Times that Beijing and Russia pose similar cyber threats to Europe, and they are seeing attacks coming from both at almost the same level. The Czech Foreign Ministry had been the target of what it called a malicious cyber campaign by a hacking group linked to the Chinese State Security Ministry. The same group, known as APT-31, also faces similar accusations from the US and UK. Beijing has denied the allegations. Prague, under Mr. Pavel, is a vocal supporter of Taiwan and has come under China's criticism for developing closer and unofficial ties with Taipei. President Pavel spoke to the island's former leader, Tsai Ing-wen, on his first day in office back in 2023. One of South Korea's biggest megachurches says that its live worship service on YouTube was briefly hacked on Wednesday. Visuals of the Onuri Church's morning service showed a North Korean flag for about 20 seconds. The altered feed was accompanied by what church officials said was propaganda music. Separately, another church experienced a similar incident, also on Wednesday, with a so-called inappropriate video shown for nearly a minute. Officials said the footage had no apparent connection to North Korea. South Korea is said to be a regular target for hackers linked to the North, and authorities are warning against increasingly sophisticated attacks. Seoul's spy agency last year revealed that spies from the North had also recruited South Koreans working at defense companies to spy on military technology. The United Nations says that North Korea has continued to commit crimes against humanity, an issue made worse by COVID-era controls that have yet to be lifted. Well, that's according to James Heenan, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Seoul. It has been more than a decade since a landmark UN report concluded that the authoritarian state abused human rights. North Korea has previously denied those claims and accused the UN of wielding human rights as a political weapon. Mr. Heenan said that the last decade has seen mixed results, with North Korea engaging more with international institutions but doubling down on control at home.
I think some of the surprises were about things that can continue to happen. So one thing that surprises me was the use of the death penalty and continued use of executions. Another was the hunger situation. The fact that, again, during COVID, it's better now, but during the depths of COVID, we saw not just hunger, but we had credible reports of starvation.
Mr. Heenan said that his team spoke to more than 300 North Koreans who fled the country in recent years. A number of those interviewees are set to speak publicly next week as part of UN efforts to put a human face on the findings. An update to the 2014 report will also be released later this year. Human rights has long been a volatile subject for any foreign engagement with North Korea. And Heenan stressed that these issues need to be part of any political settlement.
There's no point self-censoring on human rights because no one, how shall I say this nicely, no one's fooled, no one doesn't realise these issues are there.
Japan's emperor has paid respects to atomic bomb victims in Hiroshima ahead of the 80th anniversary of the tragedy. Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako offered flowers at a memorial in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park yesterday. They also met with survivors of the bombing known as Hibakasha. A U.S. atomic bomb hit Hiroshima in August 1945, killing 140,000 people. A second bomb dropped 3 days later on Nagasaki, killing 70,000 more. Now, Japan surrendered shortly after, ending World War II. And that does it for East Asia Tonight this Friday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can also find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.